There we go. This series for the next 3 weeks is on reconciliation and what I learned at Corrymeela. So, oh no, this is one that doesn't have the back to it. I need a page that has front and back to it. Who has an extra one? So, living through chaos, learning not to scapegoat. So when you're in the midst of a violent society, when things are crazy around you like it was in Northern Ireland, what typically happens is we scapegoat. So to live through a violent conflict is sometimes to live in the midst of chaos. Chaos, by definition, has no order. You don't know which way is up sometimes. What's going to happen tomorrow? In human relationships, we know deeply that much chaos is resolved in seeking identifiable scapegoats who are blamed, yet are not responsible. Scapegoats are driven out or killed or maintained within our midst as identified patients or often as silent and bullied victims. So if you're not familiar with the term identified patient, it's kind of a psychology term, big in family systems theory, where like within our families, often there's one person, and it can be at different times, who's just, they're the reason why. If only things were different with that person, everyone would be healed. It's kind of like patient zero. If you fix this, everybody is. Anyone seen or heard of the movie Encanto? So Mirabel is the identified patient in the Madrigal family in Encanto. There's actually a whole lot of family systems theory in that Disney movie. If you want a quick introduction to family systems, watch Encanto. So, when order is secured in the expulsion of scapegoats, we all lose our human possibilities to find life in abundance together as human beings. But it's our natural instinct to find someone to blame, so it's not us. Someone, if we could just fix, things would get fixed. We want to identify the problem. But at the heart of the gospel is the person of Jesus, who consistently stood with the scapegoats, exposing this way of sacrificial living, where we were quick to sacrifice others for the good of everyone else. Whether it's we're going to sacrifice you to the volcano god, or sacrifice you by making you feel less than human, not as good as one of us. We sacrifice others to make ourselves feel better. But Jesus signaled that human life was about finding a place for all. His life was about inviting people to live in communities that were not established through the unacknowledged expulsion or scapegoating of some. If you think about the Gospels, Jesus was always with the people that often got blamed, the tax collectors. If only they weren't doing this. Or the sick, because often it was believed if you had one of these illnesses, leprosy or something, that was God's judgment on you. So if God judged this person and made them sick, well, they probably did something wrong. They're probably causing, to have them around us might make God mad too. Go over there. But Jesus is often wherever we send the people we don't want. You want to know where Jesus is? Go to where the people we cast out are. That's where Jesus always will be first. If you think about that Matthew 25 story, the parable of the sheep and the goats, when did we see you hungry? When did we see you thirsty? That's what Jesus is getting at. You have to care and love for all. And you think about the story of Jesus with that mad mob in the graveyard where he met such an identified patient. The story of the man who's been cast down in the graveyard. He's kind of the scapegoat for this whole village. All their problems are probably put on him. So much so that when Jesus asks his name, he's like, I am Legion, for there are many. All this town's fears, anxieties are placed on this man who's kept out in the catacombs away from everybody else. He was so loaded up, filled with their fears, he could no longer use his own name. He had lost his identity. So according to me, they ask a couple questions to those who participate and to themselves constantly. The first is, are we so wedded to this scapegoating mechanism that we know of no other way to live? We don't even realize we're doing it sometimes. We say it all the time as a life among us. Oh, if only the immigrants wouldn't be a problem anymore. If only those MAGA Republicans could change. If only those progressive liberals wouldn't be here anymore. If only this person wasn't in office. We think about scapegoating. If only they weren't around. If only they would change, things would be better. And it's always been that way. in the US, in Ireland, in South Africa, in Germany. Every single society has at different times found some group to scapegoat. Religion, race, gender, ideology. We figure out a way to make it them and their fault. And we can feel better. So they ask, are we so tied to this we can't even imagine not doing it? We don't even think about doing it. We do it so much. It's in our DNA. Then they also ask, is it so difficult to choose to live with one another in a new, open, and inclusive manner? What's so difficult about that? We often don't want to even talk with people on the other side. It'd be easier if they were gone. Why is it so difficult? Is it just them? Is it a whole lot of us? A little bit of both? Why can't we? So in Northern Ireland, one learns that the essential truth that is hidden within the structures of stable societies, that is that states, nations, and religions have violent edges, and that in their formation, violence has been a very present reality that is readily drawn upon when all becomes uncertain. So every nation has a violent edge. In its foundation, there was violence. In its creation, there was violence. And if it's pushed and it gets uncertain, that's the first thing turned to again. Violence. Let's solve our problem with brute force, with some kind of violence. If you know that movie Wag the Dog, it's like we need to create a war to keep people focused on that. In families, we turn to violence. It may not always be physical violence. It may be verbal violence, emotional violence. Even religions, we have violence on the edge of all these religions. And when push comes to shove, religions aren't immune. We turn to violence too. There are groups that promote bombing this group, bombing that group, making this group feel horrible. You got crusades. There's all kinds of violence tied into religion. In the past, in the present, and sadly in the future, we have these violent edges. And when we get worried, when we get fearsome, we get uncertain, we turn to forms of violence. And it makes us feel better and stronger because we can control the violence. We're the doers. And because when we feel like things are uncertain, we feel like we have to just react. Things are happening to us. But in violence, we get to do it. And we have a sense of control. And we like control. So we choose that often. So a future without the other is still the implicit in most political ideologies in the conflict. Sometimes such political identities seek theological justification for the separating view. So the idea is they're thinking about a future without the other. If we could just have a future without these kinds of Republicans, if we could just have a future without these Democrats, if we could have a nation where this ideology wasn't around anymore, and that seems to be the goal. Let's wipe out the radical this. Let's wipe out the radical that. Let's wrap out the moderate this. Because whatever the radical ends, the next thing becomes the radical, and it's identified. And then when that's gone, the next thing in, and the next thing in. And before you know it, what used to be very moderate becomes radical according to this side. We still envision a way we can live without these groups, these people. If they would all move back to where they came from, they all would think like me. That's still often the articulated goal in a lot of political ideologies around the world and here. We understand, wrong page. If we interpret the story of Jesus as legitimizing the exclusion of other human beings, we fail to see the inclusive, welcoming center of the gospel. But we've done that. We have used theology to justify, as I said in the Doctrine of Discovery, well, they aren't full humans. We can do whatever to them. It doesn't matter. They're pagans. They're natives. They're whatever. Doesn't matter. They aren't one of us. We can legitimately kill them. No consequences. Church doctrine. We do that all the time. We legitimize ways of where they don't have to be a part of us. Catholic bishops saying, well, we don't like your politics, you're cut off from the communion table. You notice how I preach back here, the communion table's here? It signifies there's nothing keeping you from this table. You don't go through me or any other pastor or priest. This table has open access to all. But often we try to say, you can't be a part of the church anymore for this view, for that view. You've done this. We make a theological justification for excluding, and that misses the welcoming center of the gospel. When we do this, the space for meeting is diminished. In Ireland's contested society, where historically Britishness and Irishness have competed, the very need for relationships of trust to be established is more often than not trumped by people supporting separation from, avoidance of, or politeness around those who are different. I don't think the U.S. is very different. We have our little groups. We are in our echo chambers. We separate from each other by religion, by race, by job, by political ideology. Can you think of very many places where people of all different religion, race, creed, politics get together and aren't just existing together, but are really communing with each other? When you say, oh, we're a gym, well, you're doing your exercise with your headbuds on. Where are there many places where all these people actually get together and interact? There aren't many, and they're special if they are. We're very segregated. The cumulative reality of growing up in a separating society is that we are more at ease with those who are similar to us and less prepared to meet those who are different. We're used to people who look like us, think like us, pray like us. And when we get into some place of difference, we get uncomfortable real fast. Such a lack of relationships and structures between people across traditional divides bedevils many processes of building trust and moving beyond enmity. And then, hello, I'll be down in a minute, youth group. Get your cake and eat your dinner. When religious enmity and political fears resonate together, the space for meeting, the possibilities of the unexpected and opportunities for healing are severely limited. So when we're speaking all these fears about each other, people aren't going to want or feel comfortable finding a place and a way to come together and heal all these broken places. We can't espouse one thing and then be like, oh, come, let's be friends. It doesn't work. The challenge of reconciliation is to take the risk of meeting the other. And almost all Corrymeela's experience, when this is thoughtfully and respectfully done, isolating no one, new understandings inevitably grow. It doesn't happen overnight, but when you get people together to hear each other's stories, new understandings happen. That's why we want to do this engaged stories thing, where we're hearing stories from people, asking questions, creating a space of experience and of listening. So in our contested places, sometimes churches have been institutions in bad conscience. They sometimes have portrayed one tradition as being superior. We know that. Catholics are better than Protestants. Protestants are better than Catholics. We're the one true church. They're bad. Even among Presbyterians. My home church was like, well, those Presbyterians who don't believe in Jesus anymore, so we're going to go with the good and holy Presbyterian church. Even among denominations, we're better. You're pagans. You don't really worship God anymore. And you create these problems of we're better than you. And what should be a place of healing and reconciliation actually is a place that makes society worse. That was the big deal in Ireland. The churches didn't actually step up to help heal the society. They were often part of the problem. We don't want the same thing to be the case here. Historically, it often has been. North-South church split, political church splits. Often churches, we can go and be amongst people like us. That's the problem with a lot of churches. They're either super liberal progressive or they're super conservative, and everyone's the same, so the pastor can get up there and really rail on something. Everyone's like, yo, what's the point? You're preaching to the choir. That's why I love Derry. It's what we call purple church. We got some really liberal, some kind of liberal, some lean liberal, some center. I don't care one way or the other. They're kind of right, pretty right, far right. And we can all figure out a way to be together. And because if we can't do it in a church, we're not going to do it in the world. And there's no hope. So you don't want the church to be an institution of bad conscience, actually making things worse. Historically, often they have. Historically, they've often been a place for good, too. South Africa is an example of that, which we'll get to in 2 weeks in the sermon. And then I'll get to in 2 weeks in person. Woo! So when such actions or inactivity, churches diminish the gospel text, which invites men and women, slave and free, Greek and Jew, to enter a new, inclusive, transcending identity in the shelter of the gospel. When this occurs, Christianity becomes a religion, a story told by the victors, rather than a faith where a community lives together in the knowledge of the victim-made scapegoat. So we have to understand the ways of sacrificing this group, this person, this ideology needs to end, and the ways of communion promoted. This is the task of reconciliation, where we live, where we work, where we worship. We got to get past this idea of scapegoating. And it's not always so obvious as this person's the problem. It's if only they would change. If only we can get them on our side. If only they weren't around us. If only we can keep this little group from voting. If we can only keep this little group from having power. If we can only send them here. All of that scapegoating, and it keeps ripping away what God has called us to be, a community together. Questions, comments, snide remarks? All right, 2 more weeks of kind of this class, and then I'll be gone for 2 weeks, and then we'll start a series on Bible questions where we kind of look at these interesting questions about the Bible we always have. So it'll kind of be like a Bible 101 for the next year. So when you're done, you'll know everything there is to know except for everything else. All right, thank you very much.